Wasauksing First Nation and Shawnee First Nation that are strongly connected to the Robinson Huron Treaty, which we acknowledge. But this is a Pan-Turtle Day conference, so we acknowledge all of the treaties and the unceded lands upon which we do our work. We are all treaty people. We acknowledge and appreciate the work, the long work, and respect that have been given by the Anishinaabeg people and indeed all Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island for the protection and stewardship of the lands that we do our work on. The richness of the knowledges that they share in the stewardship of the land, air, and waters today and for our future. So, Ozawaanimkeeqwe. Again, thank you to Ozawaanimkeeqwe and Bidweodum for the smudge. That can continue. There will be time after the opening ceremony. Deina Bomberry, or Ozawaanimkeeqwe, is here with her helper, Wasauksing, to help us open this gathering in a good way. Deina is a brilliant educator. I've had the privilege of watching her with her students at the Wigwas Gmon, nurturing the language in a very kind and giving way. And she offered to come here and open this ceremony for us, and we're very grateful. So I'll turn it over to you, Ozawaanimkeeqwe.
Bonjour. Ozawaanimkeeqwe Indigenous Kozmik is idodem. Wasauksing and Donjaban Shnabel dib Jibwe and Dal Nijo Madeque. Miigwich Wendem Minogishkat. My name is Yellow Thunder Woman, and my English name is Deina. I'm from the Eagle clan, the bird clan, and I come from that beautiful island over here called Wasauksing. And I'm an Anishinaabe, with a bungie, a little bit of English. And I get that English from my grandmother. And my helper here, she's one of my students in my school, and she's been working with the water for a very long time, ever since she was in the womb of her mother. So she's been advocating and helping with taking care of the responsibility of the water. So she's my helper today, and I'm very, very honored that she comes with me and she does this beautiful work together. So I just want to share a little bit about the water because it's really important. The water is the lifeblood of our Mother Earth. Our mother, she is a creator. As women, we are creators. So it's natural for us to be responsible and take the lead in taking care of the water. Not to say it's just the women's responsibility, it's the men's as well, because they protect us as life givers. They take care of us so that life continues. Just the way Mother Earth, she's continuing to nurture us, to cleanse us, to feed us, and to guide us if we listen to her. So all that lifeblood, all that water that runs through our Mother Earth, all those rivers, all those lakes, all those ponds, even those little puddles, play an important role to everything in creation, and we're really grateful for that. And as a woman carrying that life, that water that is in the womb of a mother, it protects, it nourishes, it cleanses that new life. And when that water breaks, it's not just an announcement of new life coming, it's a cleansing for that new life to come. So that's kind of our connection as women to the water. So we teach this to our young girls so that they can be respectful, that they can give all their kindness and caring and love to the water. Just as all of you sitting here today, you all play a really important role in taking care of the water. That's why you're here. And we have to do it together. So when the water is lifted today, all your spirit, all your good heart is going to go into that water when we lift that water. It's not just us two, it's all of us together. And we honor that water by lifting it. When we sing for it, we're singing. And those words say, water, we love you. Water, we respect you. Water, we give thanks for you. So there's going to be a little bit of a break. And that's an opportunity for us to think about what is it that we're grateful for? Why do we honor the water? Why do we respect it? It's just a little opportunity to take time to do that. And we try to do that every day when we pray for the water. When we lift that water, before anything goes to our lips, we say a simple prayer. It's just, miigwech, thank you. And that's all it takes, because the water sees, it hears, it feels, and it does. And that's a belief, and we see that. We all see that. So Ozawaanimkeeqwe is going to help me lift the water, my little helper. At one time, you would have seen 5 generations of women up here. A great-grandmother, a grandmother, a granddaughter, a great-granddaughter, lifting and doing this ceremony and acknowledging the water. So if there's a great-grandmother in the crowd who would love to come up and lift a vessel of water, I would totally be honored. If not, that's fine. I'm not a great-grandmother yet. I'm only a grandmother of 12. Any great-grandmother? Just need one? Okay, that's fine. I want to say miigwech to everybody for putting your spirit into this beautiful ceremony. And we're going to be placing the sacred water over on the table here. Normally we would offer everyone a drink. In our teachings it says just a little bit is all we really need, because it's a ceremony, it's sacred water now. So during the day, if you want to stop and just have a little sip, you're more than welcome to do so. So I'm saying miigwech.
So, thank you very much for that way to ground us in the purpose of today and why we're here. For me, when I think about Georgian Bay, it's either in the wintertime, skiing across the ice, looking at the different ice flows, or sitting on a rock, that hot rock, and feeling that hot rock. And I'm pretty sure that, when we gather here, a lot of us are thinking about, I got to get to the technical work, the science, and the research. But if you really think back to it, it's that feeling of being on the bay, being there, and that's why we're here. It's why we continue to do the work that we're doing. A couple of things I'll forget, and I always forget. So my name is Greg Mason. I'm the general manager of the Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve, and I'm here today with a number of Biosphere Reserve staff. I want to recognize in particular Katrina Crevens, who's probably outside organizing in the back. She's the tall, blonde staff person. And then David Bywater, who's as well at the back of the room. Here comes Katrina. This is Katrina. And David Bywater as well. And the two of them are responsible for pulling together the State of the Bay report, the Georgian Bay State of the Bay report that was released last year. So I just want to give a round of applause to them for their work. And really the lion's share and the hardest part of doing the work of pulling this day together. So thanks to the two of you. A reminder about phones, if we could just make sure that your ringers are off, and if you've got a particularly loud vibration there, you might want to turn that one down as well, and that'd be great. And if you really want to be present, you just slide that phone away. A couple of orientation things. If you haven't found the washrooms yet, so if you go out into the lobby towards the front doors and hang a left, you'll find the washrooms there. Lunch will be provided at noon. There is a break with coffee and tea, and indeed coffee and tea is available. You can go through these doors, hang a right, and it's in that area over there. Just kind of use your nose and you'll find it by smell. And I'm just going to check with Katrina to see, or David, is Paul around? Oh, right on. So, wow. There's a bunch of pointing at each other. I'm not sure if they don't know who Paul is. Hello, Paul. So we're going to invite Paul Parete up. And Paul Parete is from Environment Canada. He is the lake lead for Lake Huron. And David can come up and help him just get his presentation onto the PowerPoint. And as you may know, and I'm sure that Paul will discuss, that each of the Great Lakes has a lake lead that is responsible for sort of the overall management direction for those lakes from an Environment Canada perspective. And indeed, this day is being brought forward in many respects by Environment Canada as a method of getting information and getting ideas on what the priorities for research and monitoring ought to be for Environment Canada and partners in the years to come. And so he's going to give a bit of an introduction to that. While bringing his stuff up, a couple of other things is Kyla and Dawson, who are the Anishinaabe Indigenous youth staff at the Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve, in October organized a build of a Wigwas Jimon, a birch bark canoe. And that Wigwas Jimon is hanging in the lobby towards the Georgian Bay side, and it's an incredible craft. It's an incredible amount of work that they put into it, and it has incredible connections into this area and the traditional ways in which the Anishinaabe peoples would have traveled. So Kyla's around all day, and Dawson, and if you wish to talk to them at lunch or at breaks, they'll be out there, and there are some posters as well that you can kind of learn about that canoe and its connection to the land and the work that is being done.
The antivirus stuff, but yeah, unless
And we pause.
technology. Yeah,
How are we doing?
it's not on the flash.
Plug it out, unplug it, and plug it back.
All right. So we'll just step into it while Paul's getting himself ready. The way that the day is shaped, if you have an agenda in front of you, so that's this document here, is there's a bunch of technical workshops, and our keynote speaker is going to be speaking about climate change, followed by a presenter who's been doing a bunch of work on climate change work within Magnetawan First Nation.
We can try.
And then after that, that climate change theme, we want you to think about and carry through the rest of the technical workshops in terms of how does climate change affect nutrients and what are the implications there? How does climate change affect others? So carry that climate change keynote speaker through the rest of the presentations. The other three presentations that are here today, or three themes rather, which are the nutrients, then lower food web and fisheries, will be followed by, well, there's two presentations each, and it's followed by a breakout session. And the breakout sessions are going to be asking the questions by each theme that are on the back of, you'll see the questions here on the back of your program. And we would ask you to take time either as the presentations are going on to take notes or answer those questions for yourself. And then you'll have an opportunity to share those with the group at your table. That information then gets collated and provided to us. So if you're able to, at the end of the day, leave us with these sheets. If you want to leave your name and your contact, that's even better if we have questions to follow up. If you're like me and you have terrible handwriting and we really want to know, it'd be great to be able to contact you. So that information is used. And as well, there are two themes that we won't have presentations on just because there's not enough time. And that is habitat and chemical contaminants. And the summary of those themes, in terms of the questions or priorities that we think we should put forward as research and monitoring questions, are off to the sides. And so if you wish, you can go and read those kind of summary of the key points and answer the questions on the papers that are provided on the wall. So chemical contaminants over here and habitat over here. Paul's just gulping down the last bit of his coffee. So, and then I'll follow up a little bit more on that in a little bit. But that's the way the program is out. So this is Paul. Thanks so much, Paul.
Good morning. Thanks for the patience. My flash drive is password protected, so we have to figure that out first. I'm happy to be here today talking about the Bay and Lake Huron in general. And I'd like to start by saying that I do this, I guess, every day for Lake Huron and Lake Ontario. We have lake leads, as was mentioned earlier, and we work on each of the lakes mainly to pull together information and knowledge and science to basically make a plan moving forward on how to protect and restore the lakes, and in this specific situation, Lake Huron. So I'm just going to kind of give a high-level, quick overview of how all this kind of fits together under lake-wide management. So we all come together, we have all kinds of information, lots of expertise, lots of knowledge. We bring this all together through different venues and workshops, and we set priorities, and then eventually have a plan. And I'll get into that quickly. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail and specifics, but I am around for the day if anybody wanted to talk about that. So I'd like to start by saying that we're all stewards of the lake. There are many tools available to us and actions that we must take to protect and restore the lake. Today I'm going to introduce, as I mentioned, one tool, lake-wide management, or more specifically, lake-wide action and management plan. This helps to bring together many natural resource agencies around the lake to work with each other and other stakeholders to develop a plan for Lake Huron. I'm going to share a few highlights, the current plan, and basically what it says about the lake, stressors, types of actions, and things like that. And then a bit of a highlight on how everyone can use the plan. So to explain lake-wide management and the LAMP, we have to begin with the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. It's a commitment between the United States and Canada to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the waters of the Great Lakes. With an origin back to 1972, this agreement has contributed to many accomplishments in restoring and protecting Great Lakes water quality over the past 45 years. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement includes 10 annexes, as you can see up there on the slide, and these annexes help guide efforts that are needed to protect and restore the Great Lakes. Today's information or discussion falls under Lake-Wide Management Annex, Annex 2, which asks us to look at all the Great Lakes issues from a lake-by-lake perspective, recognizing that each of the lakes is unique as well. Lake-wide management is a process. It's an ongoing process that seeks to maintain a common understanding of 1, how is the lake doing? 2, what is stressing the lake? And 3, what additional actions are necessary to protect and restore the lake? Partnership. Lake-wide management is the process, and the lake partnership are the people. More specifically, there's many government agencies involved, co-chaired by Environment and Climate Change Canada and United States Protection Agency. The Lake Huron Partnership has members representing over 25 different federal, provincial, tribal, and state governments and conservation authorities. In turn, these government agencies work openly and closely with others, including academia, NGOs, and the general public. There's always room on the partnership for members. Anybody interested, please don't hesitate to come and talk to me about that. So we have the process, we have the people, which leads to Lake-wide Action and Management Plan, or the LAMP is what we call it. This documents the results of lake-wide management process. It answers, as I mentioned, how the lake is doing. It answers what is stressing the lake. And it includes corresponding actions to address those stressors. The LAMP shares information about lake conditions, or known as state of the lake, or state of Lake Huron in this specific example. The image of the lake, the image on the slide recognizes that conditions are not uniform across the lake. We know this. We all in this room know this. The LAMP understands the differences in lake conditions and what actions are most necessary and where. This is why local involvement from all different agencies is important for this aspect, that different parts of the lake have different issues and we need to address those all together. That being said, it is useful to look at conditions from the lake overall. So this is an example of what we consider lake conditions, or state of the lake. Overall, Lake Huron ecosystem is in fair condition as per the draft State of the Great Lakes report, 2019 report. The table shows conditions in relation to the 9 general objectives in the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. Lake Huron, not in the best of conditions in the Great Lakes, but also not the worst. It's kind of right in the middle there. The table you see up there is supported by 28 pages of approachable science and information to support the assessment. For the sake of time today, I'm not going to get down into the details of each of those 9 objectives and how do you come up with good, fair, poor, and so on. But I've got that information if anybody wants to talk about it. Under the 2017 LAMP, the binational government agencies made formal commitments to help implement actions and science priorities. Over the past year, the member agencies have begun implementing some of the actions. I'm going to quickly highlight some of the science priorities that you can find in the LAMP. Priority actions are nutrients and bacteria-related impacts, loss of habitat in native species, invasive species, critical and emerging chemical contaminants, and of course climate change impacts. The monitoring year for Lake Huron, or the CSMI year, was 2017, and reporting out on those activities in 2019, and we'll see on the next slide. And this conference, this workshop, is part of that reporting out of that information that we'll use moving forward to set new science priorities and draft the next LAMP. As I mentioned, CSMI. As you can see, in 2017 was the field year, collection of all that information, intensive field year for Lake Huron, and we're here in 2019 reporting out. What is CSMI? It's improved binational coordination of science and monitoring on both sides of the border. Scientists are working on both sides, and we need to, at some point, needed to come together and work together to bring that science into one place. CSMI follows a 5-year rotational cycle, but CSMI does not set the priorities. The Lake Partnership identifies those priorities, and like I mentioned, today is part of that, identifying priorities. We gather information, input from all aspects, and bring that together to help set those priorities moving forward for the next LAMP. So we've had a few of these conferences and workshops this year. We had a State of Lake Huron conference. We've had a State of Saginaw Bay conference, and of course today as well, another conference and workshop that's going to bring together some information for us to use moving forward. I mentioned the LAMP covers actions, things that the agencies are going to do to protect and restore Lake Huron. The LAMP includes 43 actions that directly relate to helping address the 5 major stressors that I mentioned earlier. Within the document itself, you'll see the names of different government agencies next to LAMP actions, meaning they will commit to contributing and implementing these specific actions to the extent feasible. Over the course of the LAMP timeline, these agencies alone will be involved in hundreds of projects, big and small, which will contribute to implementation and restoration and protection of Lake Huron. How is the LAMP used? Everyone can use the LAMP. The LAMP includes practical ideas of what anyone can do to help address each of the 5 major stressors. For example, medication and pharmaceuticals and water quality. Some ideas of, take back programs for prescription drugs instead of flushing them down the toilet, things like that. Also, many local projects are proposed because they address local issues, as I mentioned earlier. But there is often a case to be made for local projects that actually impact the overall quality of Lake Huron. Something happening locally in your backyard affects the health and helps protect Lake Huron as a whole. The LAMP is a great information source for Lake Huron conditions, stressors that every steward of the lake can use. The LAMP document itself contains a compiled, organized, and very approachable summary of science that can be shared. In saying that, I urge everyone to go to binational.net and get your copy of the LAMP and have a look. And always contact me if you can, if you have any questions or information you'd like to provide or be part of any kind of the science priority setting or the partnership moving forward.
We started in 2010 bringing partners together on the coast. The first State of the Bay was released in, what did it say there, 2013, and then the most recent one in 2018. If you want more copies to distribute, there are a bunch in our neighbor's office in their stairwell waiting to be distributed out. So if you've got a good place to get those out to the public, there are some still available, many still available. The way that this works is, again, it's bringing the research together, and then we're kind of, I wouldn't say culminating in the State of the Bay conference, but this is an opportunity to have those technical experts come and present to you, see what questions you have remaining, see what concerns you have, either specific geographies or locations of concerns or specific types of questions that you are still wondering about or still don't know that we have the answers for, and it's to gather that information. And there are a number of ways we're going to do that. So as I mentioned earlier, you've got within your program the ability to write your questions down as we're talking or as we're thinking through today. Leave those with us. If you want to email us them in the next week or two, that would be great too. And as well, you get to share that with your tables on some broadsheets that will be provided to your table. And you can sort of begin to come out with some priorities that your table feels should really be the focus of work for Lake Huron. To help in that, we also provided the Lake Huron food web on your table because there's a bunch of terminology that's going to be coming at you this morning. Some of you will have no problem. Others, like me, need crib sheets like this to help us navigate our way through the food web. And as well, there is a map of Georgian Bay at your table, and if you prefer a visual form of writing your notes down, you just say, I want this location studied and this is why, then feel free to write directly onto these maps at your table throughout the day. So it doesn't have to be just when we're doing breakout sessions, just grab it and say, I've got this question I want answered. And we'll go from there. I have asked for the heat to get turned up a little bit because I noticed that people are wearing their winter parkas in here. That might be the town's gift to climate change, I'm not sure. But we've asked for it to be tweaked up a little bit. Forest is even looking chilly, so I think that's okay. So today's workshop, what happens is this public workshop, then we compile that data, and then we go to a science and technical workshop in December where we present to the science experts what you see as your concerns or the questions that you have, and they get an opportunity to sort of look at that and determine whether or not they feel that they've got the answers to those questions, or they really see an area of work, and if it's shifting and shaping their priorities going ahead. Our job as GBBR and other non-for-profits in government is to find ways like the State of the Bay and forums like this to get back to you and say, here's how your concerns and questions are being answered, and provide that information to you as a means of follow-up. And as well, Environment Canada does that work, MECP, everybody does a little bit of that public outreach work to get engaged. And indeed, binational.net is sort of the end point for a lot of this work. So your input today, listen to the presentations. If you have to go in the middle of the day, that's fine. The summaries in terms of the key points are put forward in the program. You can respond there, and you can get back to us with your feedback. It is a long day. You can review in the program the suggested priorities and respond there, comment as a group. And if you can, begin to provide rationale for your points. So why is it that you're asking these questions? Why is it that you want this geography? As much detail as possible helps the scientists and researchers better inform the actions going forward. So that's that. Are there any questions about today before we move on to our first keynote speaker? All right. Before we do that, what I'd like you to do is, if you are from a local municipality or from a municipality, I'd like you to stand up. Whether you're leadership or staff, that's fantastic. Or you can stay standing or you can sit down wherever you want. But have a seat down for a second. All right, if you're from a First Nation, either leadership or staff, stand up. That's great. That's what happened now.
provincial or federal government? Stand up. This is pretty evenly diverse crowd. And I'm forgetting NGOs. From an NGO representing an NGO, you might wear more than one hat in this room, so that's fine too. Right, thank you. And if you are just a member of the interested public, stand yourself up. And I'm going to take it if you're an elected official, that you are also a member of the public and you would stand up as well. That's awesome. If you have a passion for Georgian Bay, please stand up. All right. So just stand up a little bit. So just no, keep standing. You got about 45 minutes of sitting ahead of you, so you might just kind of wiggle your legs a little bit. I just want to let you know that we appreciate all the speakers that have come today from some distance and some not so far to give us and share with us their knowledges. In lieu of speaker gifts, the Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve will be making a donation to 4 food banks up and down the coast, First Nation and local municipal food share organizations. So just we'll give a round of applause right now to all of the speakers. That's our way of acknowledging them and just getting less stuff out in the world that the folks may not need. So thank you right away to the speakers. So. And you got a seat that I'm right now. Our first speaker is David Sweetnam. And that's right? David Sweetnam is the executive director of the Georgian Bay Forever. He's been there for 10 years. You might have seen him and his organization doing microplastics work in Prairie Sound, cutting down trichomoniases from around all over Georgian Bay. I think he's got a sore neck because of some of that work this year. When it comes to climate, David Sweetnam puts his money where his mouth is. He's been an early adopter of many climate-friendly technologies, from his car to his house to his boat, and he's a true believer in doing the right thing by that. It's been a great privilege to work with David over the years. He's a really engaging speaker and one of the smartest Georgian Bay guys I know. So, David, thanks for spending time with us today.
Well, thank you very much. The logistics here. I want to jump right in and give you kind of an overview of what's going on globally, and then we'll start to bring that right down into Georgian Bay. So it was back in 1975 that we had the first coinage of the terms global warming and climate change. This was by an oceanographer, Wallace Smith Brooker, who published a paper saying, hey, I think I'm seeing something going on in the oceans, and I think it's going to be something that we need to really be careful about. We are living on a planet, and when we look up at the sky, it seems endless. But actually, there's a very thin strip of atmosphere, a skin covering this globe, and it isn't infinite. It's very finite. And into that little tiny volume, we're actually dumping 110 million tons of global warming pollution each and every day. That's the equivalent heat energy of exploding 500,000 atomic bombs every day. That's 6 per second. 6 explosions like that every second. That's a lot of heat. It's not a good trajectory right now, and it is having measurable impacts in our environment. 18 of the 19 hottest years have occurred since the year 2000, and the last 5 years have been the hottest years on record. So something's not business as usual. Global ocean temperatures are increasing. Our house is literally starting to burn. It's on fire. And you've heard this term out there with young Greta Thunberg saying, our house is on fire. Little child talking to world leaders with just the truth of a child. So right now, we're not even on path to kind of, everybody's talking about we need to keep global warming down to 1.5 degrees and we need to take all these actions right away. I'll tell you, knowing how people are behaving, we're not on track for 1.5. We'll be lucky if we keep it at 3 degrees. And that's going to have hugely significant impact going forward. If we were to try to keep it to 1.5 degrees, we would have to have the actions in place in 18 months, ready to go, and we would need to be starting those changes, starting to implement those policies, instead of debating whether or not still, in some places, climate change is even real, right? If it's really caused by humans. These are debates that should have been finished 40 years ago. Even the first turns to this came in the 1880s, when scientists started looking at burning of coal and seeing some changes, and just doing British thermal units back in the United Kingdom, figuring out how much heat energy was being released by that burning. So we've had over a century of trying to get our heads wrapped around this. We need to get going. The next 18 months, therefore, will actually be very critical. So coming up to a whole bunch of political things that are going on in the world, there's going to be some significant watershed moments that are coming, and coming quickly. And not to be complacent, I think what we really need to do is have an honest look at where we Canadians are. On a per capita basis, we are the 3rd largest emitters of global warming gases in the world, because of our lifestyle, because of the entitlements we feel, and because of the way we conduct ourselves. This isn't somebody else's problem. We are creating this problem, and other people are having to pay for the decisions that we're making. And unfortunately, if you look at this chart, instead of countries, even maybe publicly, you would think, given the political context of the United States, that the way they were heading was towards increasing their emissions. They're actually on the decreasing side of the balance sheet, while Canada is on the increasing side. It's not a real good position for us to be in. So we certainly can't point fingers. That's actually having profound changes on global circulation patterns, both in the atmosphere and also in the water. And if you look at the jet stream, on the left side is a normal circulation pattern where the polar vortex is just kind of hovering around the North Pole. The jet stream is a little wavy, but it's moving around the globe. And on the right side of your chart is what happens when that gets destabilized and we start to split that vortex. And remember back in 2014, when I think that was probably the first time the public really started to hear about the polar vortex, we had that real cold rush, right? It was because that split happened and cold Arctic air started to get drawn down over North America and Europe, and the warmer air started to get sucked up to the North Pole, and the North Pole broke heat records for 3 years in a row. The other thing is this amplification. If you have 1 degree temperature increase at the equator, it actually translates, because of those circulatory patterns, to a 3 degree increase at the polar regions. And because we're a northern country, that means while we talk about the global average changing by 1.5 degrees or 3 degrees, in Canada we're talking about 6 degrees to 9 degrees of temperature increase over the normal. And that changes all of the ocean circulation patterns, and those have very profound changes, both on our weather, like the El Niño and El Nino changes that we see, but also in the deep ocean circulation patterns. And the North Atlantic circulation actually impacts every single ocean on the planet. As that changes, as that heat pump starts to work in a different way, we actually start to change the climate of the entire planet. And you see this in the wintertime, especially in Canada, with the northern parts changing by 4.5, 5 degrees already. Down in the southern Ontario regions, and Parry Sound is kind of, middle, but still kind of southern. Those changes won't be quite as profound, but in the northwest especially, that's where 1/3 of the Earth's glaciers
exist. Canada is home to about a third of the world's glaciers, and that's warming up at a very, very rapid pace. So the rate and magnitude of climate change that we're seeing now is presenting us with two very different candidates depending on what actions we take. And if we decide not to take much action and continue on with a high emissions scenario, we'll be looking at about 6-degree temperature change by the end of the 21st century. If we were to start immediately stabilizing our carbon emissions right now, and this is planetary, not just in Canada, then we could perhaps keep to a low emission scenario and start looking at only a 2 degrees Celsius temperature increase. And that has really, we can turn on an air conditioner, and if it's done with green energy, maybe not do too much bad to our bodies and so on. But our ecosystems aren't designed. Some of our species, 2 degrees is a temperature change that can be fatal. So it has very profound impacts in the ecosystems. So that's kind of just the bad news, I guess, from the global perspective, but it's reality. Like, you can't even start to solve problems until we agree on what the problems are and what the current state is, so we can have an honest conversation about this. But bringing it down into Georgian Bay, this regional trend is towards warmer temperatures, increases in extreme storms. We are going to also experience more extreme times of drought. And winter and spring are showing signs of becoming wetter, and late summer is starting to show signs of becoming kind of drier. So the timing of things, except for October, which seems to be getting wetter, a lot of precipitation happening. So increases, changes, that's the theme. Things are changing. Things are not the same. And again, as I mentioned, while the global temperature change measured right now is about 0.8 degrees, Canada's seeing over double that, 1.7 degrees, according to a published study by Environment Canada. The surface water temperatures, we are seeing an increase since the 1980s of about 2.5 degrees. And when you start mapping out what that looks like, the trajectory of that is a continuing increase. If you think about how much energy it takes to boil one pot of water, and then you realize the volume of Lake Michigan Huron, that's a lot of energy being stored in that water. And as I mentioned, when that polar vortex splits, this is what happens to the temperature. North Pole, North America is at the bottom of this picture, and you can see how that cold air got sucked down right over North America and has impacts in our watershed. We are seeing a decline in ice cover, though, overall, and the ice that's here is thinner. It's not as thick. If you went back to the mid-1800s, some of the observations are that there's 4-foot thick ice right across Georgian Bay. Now we see open water most of the time with some shoreline ice. And again, according to NOAA, about a 71% decline in ice cover. That has impacts when you add the faster wind speeds to it, of causing more winter wave action. And unfortunately, that's a time when things start to evaporate. So as the water is warmer than the air and the air is drier when it's cold, it actually sucks that heat and moisture out of the Great Lakes. So it's actually during the coldest months of the year that we get evaporation. In the middle of June, when the water temperature and the air temperature are about the same and there's lots of moisture in the air, there's not really much evaporation happening. But when you get that cold, dry air over the warm water in January and February, those cold months, you get a huge amount of evaporation happening. And you see that here in lake effect snow and those kind of phenomena. That declining ice cover, because of that increasing wave action, can also have impacts on fish populations. And for example, the Ozawaanimkeeqwe First Nation, who manage the whitefish population down around the bottom of the all around the Tobermory Peninsula, are noticing severe impacts on their whitefish fishery because that wave action comes in and causes increasing eggfish death. And I know Arunas has got way more information than I do on that kind of stuff, but one of the things we were talking about at dinner last night is an observation of declining whitefish recruitment. Maybe there's things like that happening. So Drew Gronwald, a scientist that I know and have had nice chats over beer with, has made this statement as one of the meteorological experts in the Great Lakes, that really the conditions, these transitions between highs and lows, including water levels like we've seen over the last 6 years, from the extreme low to record-setting highs, that's the normal, that's the new normal. And if we look at that, Lake Superior water levels mapped on the top of this chart and Lake Huron water levels mapped on the bottom, what that means is this divergence. We're starting to see these kind of increased extreme conditions happening and more rapid transitions between those. And that has impacts on runoff, sedimentation, water temperatures, and all of the other things that are going to impact the health of the ecosystem. Lake Superior, of course, is regulated. That's why it's fairly stable. We can decide what its water level is to some extent. But this year, Lake Superior set an all-time ever record high. So just to describe this graph, 2017, 2018, and 2019, and all of the months you can see here, the red line is the water levels. The blue line is the average water level. The bottom little crosshatches with the years on them is the extreme low levels that have been recorded, and at the top, the extreme high water levels that have been recorded. And you can see each year we kind of go through a cycle, but where we start the year and where we end the year can be different. In Lake Erie, we also set an all-time ever record high this past summer. Lake Ontario, we also set an all-time ever record high. And in Lake Michigan Huron, we almost set it. We were within, an inch of setting an all-time ever record high. So if we look back and compare last year to this year, 2018 to 2019, to kind of prognosticate on what 2020 might start off looking like, where we started the year and where we finished the year was within about 5 centimeters. This year, where we start the year and where we are right now, which is the end of the upper red line, right now we're about 40 centimeters over where we started. And so as we started... right now we're about 40 centimeters over where we started. And so as we started to drop, as the water level declined, it only had to drop from its peak about 20 centimeters, a little over a foot. This year it would have to drop almost over half a meter. And if we take what happened last year, because meteorological conditions right now and ocean currents and all of those other global patterns are pretty similar in 2019 at this time of year as they were in 2018 at this time of year. And you can see that if we do what we did last year, we're not going to end up anywhere near where we started this year. So going into next year, we're basically looking at starting off the year at an all-time record high. And in fact, the next 6 months, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is forecasting water levels that are at or above extremes. So if I move that over to this time of year, it's not very likely that we're going to drop back to normal. So very high likelihood that we'll be exceeding those water levels going into the year. And I was glad to see that the Airways is no longer an island out in the parking lot by the dock, but the last time I was here just a month ago, and for part of the summer, that was actually an island out there. The water level is right over the parking lot. So the biggest point here to make is that, my grandfather tells me that these water levels have always changed and they always go up and down and whatever. Those conditions, the historic conditions, are no longer relevant because the global climate conditions have changed so remarkably that back historic perspectives are no longer applicable. The conditions have dramatically changed. We're seeing already increases in the frost-free season, for example. Upper temperature limits for where tick species used to be limited to are now moving northwards, and we're starting as people to see impacts of various disease vectors like Lyme's disease that is tick-borne starting to come north. This was the Ontario Lyme's disease map. And here's something, there's a lot of talk about dietary changes and not eating as much meat, for example, as being some ways of starting to address climate change. And I have a slide to show you a little more about that in a minute. But this may be actually Mother Nature's way of making this happen. This is the Lone Star tick, which is starting to be found in southern Ontario, even in Hamilton, and starting to move north. If this tick bites you, you end up with an allergy to meat. You can't eat meat. So Mother Nature may be sending some help up here to say, hey, we're going to help you guys cut down on your meat consumption. If you think your allergies are worse this year than they have been before, you're right, because the amount of pollen that's in the atmosphere is increasing. And it will almost triple by the time we hit 2040. Poison ivy. When I was a kid working on Beausoleil Island for the summer, we had to put a boardwalk right through a whole patch of poison ivy, and it was, on that side of the equation. I won't say how far, but nowadays the amount of oil, the irritant that the plant is producing is increasing, and the plant's growing. And I'm not sure if you've ever seen one of these caterpillars, but they're amazing, this lime green. It used to be southern Ontario was kind of the extreme northern range of this species that goes all the way down to Florida. Now, this picture was taken in Honey Harbor. We're starting to see maybe the northernmost ranges of these species starting to come up into our space. So you'll start seeing more and more of these organisms that maybe are unfamiliar starting to come up into our area. By the way, the reason it says don't touch it is because if you do, it's like getting a bee sting from every single one of its spines, and it's really quite painful, I'm told. I didn't experience it. So something we need to do is change. It's change. The atmosphere is changing, the world is changing. We need to start changing. We need to start taking action. And Georgian Bay Forever started a project called Families for Change. We gave people initially just kind of 4 areas that people could start thinking about and doing something about. And we ran a little contest this summer, and we gave people some little prizes for the actions that they took. But through this first year, we were really happy to say the Georgian Bay community took over 3,140 actions. That's a great start for our first year. And we'll continue to develop that program out with the Biosphere and any other partners we can work with. This is just our winning families. They were able to take 49 tasks, get 365 points. So there are 2 kind of strategies here, right? The first thing is we don't want to make people feel like it's impossible to solve this problem, because it is possible. So the first thing is to enable people to start taking some concrete actions. And we've been talking a lot about, hey, you just need to do something. Just do something. Make some change. But the second thing is we are getting to the point where we have to create this wider context, this acceptance for people to say, hey, it's okay if bigger actions are starting to be taken too, because we need to do those things. And it's like working in, right? This is like start with a little action, get up off the couch. This is my workout picture. Unfortunately, that's the before and this is the after now. But it's just training those muscles for change, right? Starting to actually be able to get up and do something and feel good about it, and then take the next bigger challenge, and the next bigger challenge, and so on. Because a study just came out in October, this was prepared for the United States. If you take a little action, if you change 3 light bulbs to LEDs, you're okay. We actually are at a point now where we need to make bigger changes, to take some more inspiring actions. But it's a good start. Looking at things like LED light bulbs, the entire string, 5 strings of those light bulbs use what used to be in a flashlight bulb. One little battery-operated flashlight bulb, about 5 watts. you can put an entire string of patio lights up and not even use that much energy anymore. So you save money, you have all the light you ever wanted anyway, and you're helping the climate, right? So those are good little steps. And if we look at the adoption of technologies like that, very simple things to do. Also, those bulbs last about 25 years. You're seeing globally that these are starting to take off, the sales of these things, right? I mentioned food earlier. If you look at the selections of your food, this is the equivalent distance you would be driving a small car by eating 1 kilogram of this food product. So eating 1 kilogram of beef is like driving this little car 176 kilometers. And eating tofu is like only driving at 13 kilometers. So your food choices do make a big difference. A lot of that food impact is through waste. Purchasing food and then it doesn't get eaten and then you just throw it away. So the production cost and transportation and all of the other impacts of that lack of use of that food is really significant, right? So be more efficient. What you buy, eat it. 14% of the food purchased in the United Kingdom from the study that I found was thrown away. It's a huge amount of waste. There are areas where we have addressed some of the carbon loading. For example, in Ontario, we've addressed a lot of the carbon out of energy. There's not a lot of carbon that we're still pumping out into the atmosphere because we decommissioned all of the coal-fired generating stations, right? And we got a little more energy conservation. We actually took about 2% of the production capacity off the grid over the last couple of years. So those are things where there's not a lot of low-hanging fruit left in those areas, but you can see in transportation, there's a huge impact still available. So what are you driving? And if you're not driving electric yet, you will be the next 10 years. So your next vehicle purchase, start thinking about changing from a gas-powered vehicle, for example. Industry and manufacturing, things like concrete uses a lot of, or produces a lot of carbon, but we need concrete. Well, we may have to say, well, if we need concrete, then what do we have to give up that we don't really need to use high-intensity carbon-producing solutions for, right? We are going to need to make those trade-off calls as a society. And then in buildings, insulating and retrofitting all of the buildings that exist to make sure that they're energy efficient. There will be huge business opportunities for young folks, entrepreneurs, that want to get into any of these areas. These are massive opportunities for the economy. The rise of renewables, in fact, we're starting to see is displacing oil, fossil fuel. As I mentioned, Ontario is no longer really, even the peaking plants, we have a couple of natural gas peaking plants, we don't really need to use those as often, right? So we are offsetting that because we have more renewable energy coming online. And nuclear energy, there's even great evolutions in nuclear technologies, G4, generation 4, small modular reactors that don't produce the radioactive byproducts that the old technologies do. Those will be incredibly exciting new technologies that we can see. And we're starting to see right now that the cost of producing grid-scale electricity is cheaper with solar and battery than it is to actually build a cogen, a natural gas generating facility. It's actually getting cheaper to use these renewables. And that's the economic driver that we're going to see make these changes. Peterborough, Ontario built this big, huge farm, publicly owned. 900 megawatts in Sarnia, that at one point when it was built was actually the largest solar farm in North America. People aren't even aware that in Canada we have big solar farms like that, but you're starting to see them up in this area, and I know Parry Sound has some green initiatives for that. But the neat thing about these technologies is just like cell phones, you don't need to run all the wires to take these hydro power projects and move the energy from where the waterfall is to where the people are. You actually can put a solar panel right on the roof of your house, anywhere you happen to be, and use that energy in your home. And as the price decreases, these will become more and more cost effective. In fact, even the Kentucky Coal Mining Museum has realized that solar can save them money. So the writing's on the wall. I just wanted to show you this graph because often you hear in the media some pundits blaming, China and India they're polluting, so why should we clean up our act, right? But if you look at India, for example, they had bids to produce solar power for about 4.4 cents per kilowatt hour. It's cheaper to do that than it is to produce power with coal. And when you start looking at the capacity that they are adding to generate clean energy, it's quite remarkable what their plans are. So they're starting to move in the right direction, and China has one of the largest solar projects in the entire planet in construction right now. So where can you make, your impacts? What are the things in your lives? They're going to fall into these kind of categories of transportation or the manufactured goods that you use, and as Greg said, reducing our need for things is something that can also have a contribution to that. Electric vehicles are here. There's about 40 models right now. In fact, Ford just had a big announcement the night before last, right? The electric Ford Mustang is now available. And Tesla. The electric vehicles, in Q3 of 2018, the electric car was actually the biggest seller in North America. When the government transitioned in Ontario, they, if you recall, removed the electric vehicle rebate, and that did have a profound impact on purchasing of electric cars. While there was 21% growth in Canada, Ontario actually saw a 55% year-over-year decline because of the removal of that incentive. Now, eventually, you're not going to even be able to buy a gas-powered vehicle because manufacturers are no longer going to be making them. For example, Volvo already is committed to 100% electric vehicle in its product offerings. But those incentives right now, as we're trying to get the public to take up these new technologies, does have some significant impact. Toronto's just added a bunch of electric buses. My son got on one the other day, and he said it was really weird because it was so quiet. Right? Well, that's the downside of electric vehicles, I guess, right? No noise. But half the buses in the world will be electric by the year 2025. This is a truck, semi-tractor, right, that Tesla's producing, and Walmart's been buying these. Walmart Canada. Made of the Mist tour boats announced that they're going to go fully electric. And this was up at Des Mazdon's marina in Point O'Barrow. This past summer, they had a family day, and a manufacturer from Burlington brought up an electric boat. And I said to Andy, the owner, if you go back about 100 years ago and remember those little putt-putt kind of classic Georgian Bay coastal boats, this was about the same speed as this electric boat, so we're starting off now with that kind of similar technologies. A very elegant little boat, nice ride, silent, really fun to be part of, but it's starting to. They actually retrofitted, you can see kind of the tiller driver there. This was a paddle boat, and they retrofitted all and have created an electric version of it now. And this is was shown at the Paris Air Show in 2019. This is a fully battery electric airplane. It's this particular model is produced in Israel, but it's a regional passenger vehicle. It can go about 650 miles. So it'd be like Porter Airlines in Toronto or Air Canada's Jazz, those kind of little regional commuter jets. You could replace those with not using fuel, but with using battery electric.
Firms are already big commercial firms, including energy companies who are calling themselves now energy companies instead of fossil fuel companies. They see the writing on the wall. They've been taking action for the last decade, silently behind the scenes, to prepare themselves and their shareholders to move off of this carbon source. But a lot of the reserves that they have on their balance sheets that give them value right now will never see the light of day. And that's not according to environmentalists, that's according to the head of the Bank of England. And he's been saying this since before 2014.
In fact, BP's head of strategy has already said that same thing. We know that the reserves that we've got on our balance sheet will never see the light of day. We won't pull them out of the ground. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, but if you have a portfolio or investments, you need to be thinking about that negative asset value in the future when suddenly they devalue those reserves. And on that day, those stocks will crash. And if you're still one of the people holding them then, you won't get any value out of those things. And I doubt many people are still holding them, but there may be. I know there were at my dad's Probus Club when I spoke to them in January. We know that Canada, by virtue of our lifestyle and our geography, where we live, that we are one of the largest emitters, as a country, 9th, but per capita, 3rd. So we do need to take that responsibility and shoulder it ourselves. We can't avoid the baked-in consequences either. We are going to have to adapt. We have to take adaptive measures. That's just baked in right now. But if we do start to take action, we can minimize what that impact means. This is the biggest thing. Public complacency isn't an abstract threat either. It's real. We have a lot of complacency, and as the voting public, we need to make sure that the people that we elect understand our message, that we need and want to take action. And we're seeing that, right? The People's March, climate marches are going on around the globe, and it's really exciting now to see young people getting out on Fridays, striking for the climate. Has anybody have children or grandchildren that have participated in any of these climate strikes yet? Yeah? Great, right? Young people starting to be empowered, looking into the future, seeing the life that they're going to be handed, and taking action, getting active. And of course, young Greta Thunberg from Sweden, I just kind of wanted to close with her words. She said to the United Nations Council in Katowice, Poland, at the end of 2018, about a year ago, she said, in the year 2078, I will be having my 75th birthday party. Maybe my children and my grandchildren will be with me that day. Maybe they will ask me about you, the people who were around in 2018. Maybe she will ask me why you didn't take any action when there was still time. What you do or don't do will affect her, your grandchildren, your children for the rest of their lives. So please take action. Our house is on fire. No matter what your political leanings are, there is one value that every single one of us shares. We all want to protect our families. All of us. And we need to take action to do that because this is our only planet. This is where we live. This is our whim. And there is no planet B. Thank you.
We do have time, if David is okay with that, for a few questions. Sure. If there are any questions out there. And so we'll take this gentleman here, and I'm actually just going to do this for you. There you go. Perfect. Thank you. So,
hi, my name is AJ.
Do you want the mic?
Yeah, sure.
You want the mic? It won't be long. Yeah. It's, the question I have is in regards to the effect of 1.5 degrees increase. We're already at 1, right? I think that's acknowledged, we're already in trouble. But I'm having trying to get my head around this. Why are we even accepting 1.5? Because how can we even live with that?
So, very good question. Let me put it in the context of maybe a couple of things. 1 degree temperature increase in the atmosphere is a 7% increase in the amount of vapor, water vapor, that it can hold. So you see bigger storms, right? We see more water dumping quicker. I have some video images that are time-lapse, but you can literally see the water fall out of the cloud and
bounce and boil right off of the surface of the earth. As that increases, the storms and the inundation that we're seeing and the flooding conditions that we've seen in this area increase. So can you get insurance anymore on your home if you're in what they call a pluvial flood zone? Not just fluvial from the lake waters or river waters, but where so much rain falls that it can't drain away from where your property is, right? So insurance values can go up. And the insurance industry is very interested in remapping all of that stuff. That same 1 degree of temperature increase leads to about a 12% increase in the number of lightning strikes. And we know in the summertime, especially if you look back last year at the Parry Sound fire, when you have drought-like conditions and the understory is dry and you almost get to 100% likelihood of ignition, we will have more fires. And that's what's happening exactly in California, where they have these profound droughts right now, Southwest US, the Four Corners. Every single lightning strike that hits is actually lighting a fire up. So people now are, for every day of the year, they have to be prepared to leave their home at a moment's notice. Those are the kinds of things that will start impacting us. But in the ecosystem, there's lots of conditions that change. pH levels can change. That can cause bleaching of coral reefs, which create a bunch of oxygen that we're breathing. So globally, there's a whole bunch of ecosystem impacts too. I think pressures on aquatic species, the Ontario government report said that it's aquatic species that are actually going to experience the most profound impacts from changes in temperature, because they're used to living in very stable temperature conditions, and if those start changing, there are profound impacts too. So commercial fisheries, recreational fisheries, yeah.
That doesn't really address what I thought I asked.
But,
because my question really is, at 1 degree, we're already in trouble.
yes.
Where are we going to be at 1.5? Why are we even accepting 1.5?
Oh, I agree. We shouldn't be accepting it, except that would require an enormous amount of change globally that I can't promise you we're going to take.
But aren't we really kidding ourselves? Like if 1 degree, like I'm looking at all the changes that are already happening at 1 degree, it's right on average.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're saying, okay, fine, we're going to try to get to 1.5 degrees, which obviously we all know we're not getting to. But even at 1.5, we're setting a standard of expectations here.
Yeah.
That is unreal.
Yeah. Unsustainable, do you mean? Or yeah. And I agree, right? And that's the frustrating thing as a scientist, and that's why there's a real condition now called climate depression, right? Because scientists have been living this stuff and seeing these changes, and the public is just way behind taking it up politically. But I agree. I don't know how to solve. I don't know that we can solve it, but I totally agree with your observation. Yeah.
Anybody else?
If I haven't answered that enough, I'd look forward to talking to you after too. Yeah.
So thanks very much, Jim. It's fantastic having folks like David working on Georgian Bay with us. So we'll just slide this back in, hopefully without breaking it.
Our next speaker is Cory from Magnetawan First Nation. For those of you that are familiar with the Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve, you no doubt know Rebecca Pollock, who's our executive director. And if you know her well enough, you know that she's this incredible bundle of energy, runs 1 million miles a minute. And Cory is Magnetawan First Nation's version of Becky Pollock in my mind, so which is a huge compliment, by the way. Cory is the environmental management biologist for Magnetawan First Nation. Her previous work has included conservation work with Toronto Zoo. She has a Bachelor of Science honors, really close to Master's, or done? Close to Master's, and is an incredible leader and team member of Magnetawan First Nation's Species at Risk and Ecology Unit. So we're really grateful for her time, and thanks so much, Cory.
Shorter. Good morning, Parry Sound. How's everybody today? Woo! That's right. One more time. I really like the standing exercise everybody did earlier today. But what I also want you to do is look to the table next to you and just high five or fist pump somebody. Do it, let's do it, let's do it. All right, yeah, all right, cool. Yeah, very good. All right, and I think that's the theme of today is we're all here together, and I feel like moving forward, we need to be walking together forward on this earth that we share, and we have a responsibility towards. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself. Hi, I'm Cory. Hi. I guess it was kind of already said to me. I graduated Trent University, and I'm just almost finished my master's degree. I work at the Toronto Zoo, and I've been at MAG now for almost 4 years, and kind of the things that we work on is project development. We do site assessments, a lot of partnership development. We love working with everybody, and research design and managing these projects. So to talk about some of the projects that we've done a traditional land use study and a mapping study. We've had capital plan, a land use plan that we're currently in the process of finalizing. We're of course working with the MTO and the Highway 69 expansion and planning for that. We've done fisheries monitoring with the OFRC and walleye and sturgeon since 2014, and we started picking that up again this year, which we're really excited about. We've got an environmental management plan. We hold 7 kilometers of transmission line from the Henvey Inlet Wind Farm, and these are our 3 main projects that we have on the go right now. We're recipients of AFSAR, which are the Aboriginal Fund for Species at Risk, a environment and climate change funded project. The Indigenous Guardians Network, which we received this year, a recognition of being Indigenous Guardians and part of the nationwide network. So we're really excited about that. And of course, our community-based climate change monitoring program, which is kind of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So, this is so small. Help me, I'm blind. Just make this a little cool in. So, while I get to this, remote. All right. I'd like my team to stand up. Because, there's really nothing gets done without an actual team. So this is my team. These are my biologists and youth and students and technicians. And, these are the people that make it happen. So thank you, guys. So to talk a little bit about this project is what we did was we partnered with a whole bunch of different organizations and academic institutions, because what we wanted to do was we wanted to look at climate change, but we also wanted to look at the traditional significance of the work that we're doing and what this means to our First Nations communities and how we can integrate the traditional science into how we view and the lens that we look through when we're actually trying to look at climate change and try to understand what's going on. And some of our project partners are the Boreal Water Futures, McMaster University, Mount Allison University, Biosphere Reserve, Environment Canada, Laurentian University. The list goes on, but we're very grateful for all of our partners because it helps us build, that big monster of the work that we like to kind of do. So when we're talking about climate change, it's always this discussion of what is climate change? What is global warming? Right? So you kind of try to want to break it down sometimes to your non-science friends and talk about it. So when we're talking about global warming, as it was just noted in the previous presentation, which was fantastic, by the way, that's really good. Since the early 20th century, when we had our Industrial Revolution, we started creating exponentially larger amounts of emissions that have gone up into the atmosphere and started warming the Earth. And because of that, we have a changing climate. We have all of these changing phenomena that have a lot of effects that we are now seeing tenfold. So we have our greenhouse effects, but we also have our Earth response, so our extreme weather events that I know everybody has experienced at this point. So we have our forest fires. We have those massive hurricanes like we saw in the Bahamas. Sea levels are rising, the waters are heating. We're getting a lot more drastic seasonal changes and things that are hard to keep track of on a consistent basis at this point. And of course, we're losing ice and we're losing glacial masses, and we're also losing our permafrost. So to kind of put into a picture all of the things that we've discussed, it really goes to show there's a large situation happening when it comes to things like climate change and things that are changing. And, you know, sometimes it's harder for people to notice when they're living in city centers and they're not actually seeing their backyard literally on fire. So when we're talking about that, literally all of Ontario was on fire last year. Literally all of Ontario was on fire last year. And, you know, I grew up in Ajax, so I grew up in the city, but now I live in French River, and it was very close to home. And once you realize actually how this is affecting you in such a magnitudinal kind of way, it really hits home with how important this work is that we're doing. So when we're talking about things like impacts to wildlife, there's a multitude of factors that are influenced and also exacerbated by these processes. When it comes to industrial, you know, what goes up must come down. So pollutants are going up, and contaminants are coming down, and they're going into our systems, and they're affecting our wildlife. Our invasive species, the northern ranges are growing, like was mentioned with the ticks. So there's new species inhabiting areas that have never been inhabited by those species. And because of that, they're outcompeting other species, and we're seeing that effect too. And it's starting to destroy habitat and outcompete those species. The changes of quality and quantity of habitat are changing because all of the heat sources are changing, the water and hydrology systems are changing. And our parasites, we're having parasites and disease, that's shifting. Our animals are struggling. When we think about things like winter ticks, that's a huge issue right now with our large ungulates, our moose and deer populations, but also with weather. Our seasonal changes and timelines are changing. We're having longer summers, shorter winters, and then switch. And extreme weather events, like literally all of Ontario was on fire last summer. And then this year, all of our rivers were flooding and half of our communities were in a state of emergency. So these things are happening more and more each year, and they're becoming more and more volatile, and these are things that we have to start addressing. But we also have to shift the lens that we're looking through in order to make sure we have that big picture idea of what we're dealing with and then how to deal with it. So when we're talking about Magnetawan First Nation, we are part of the Georgian Bay Biosphere Reserve. We're 4,700 hectares of pristine, contiguous wetlands and wetland habitat. And we have marsh, swamps, fens, bogs, peatlands. It goes on, but we're also a biodiversity hotspot for species at risk reptiles because it is such a special area. And it was noted before, some animals are not really great with adapting to just those minor increased temperatures that we may not notice, but animals that have to do things like overwinter or adapt to these weather conditions struggle a lot more than we do. And of course, we have travel routes for ungulates. We have travel routes and home for all of our resources and the traditional resources that our communities are so dependent on. So why are wetlands important, right? They provide resources, and they provide home and shelter for resources. So for things like hunting, trapping, medicines, and food, wetlands are a very important kind of factor in that one. When it comes to the environment, our wetlands store a huge percent of our Earth's carbon. They hold on to the carbon, so we kind of want to keep them healthy in order to not allow them to release that carbon, because I think we've got enough of that already. Species habitat, water filtration, and they're also floodplains. And with all the floods lately, I feel like we need a couple extra floodplains. So we're talking a little bit about carbon sequestration, like they hold on to the carbon substantially. So that's why it's really important that they're not drying up or being destroyed and then releasing this into the atmosphere. About 35% of Ontario's surface area is covered by wetlands, and our peatlands store about 25% of total peatland carbon in Canada. When we're talking about things like medicines and traditional resources, a lot of them depend or grow inside of wetlands. So just to name a few, we have our white water lilies, our yellow water lilies, our cranberries, our pitcher plants, and our weeke, our sweet flag. When we talk about traditional resources, they also depend on these wetland systems. So we have our moose, our beaver, our muskrat, our geese, and they use them for food, foraging, travel, bathing, avoiding predation, and nesting. And then, of course, there's these guys. These are all our friends that live here with us on Mag. And we've got snapping turtles, Massasauga rattlesnakes, Blandings turtles, painted turtles, red-effed newts. That's a newt that lives on land for its juvenile stages. It's pretty neat. Juvenile snapping turtles. Look at that smile. right? So these are the guys that depend on these systems that are super vulnerable to these changing climates. And these guys can't adapt like we can to when they're losing their home or when their home has no water. So these are the guys that actually maintain those systems for us and for the systems that we depend on. But they depend on these systems to maintain some sort of stability. So it's really important for us to understand what that change is happening and how it's affecting them. Now, one of my friends is an economist, and I've had this discussion with him many times before. He looks at me, he says, Cory, what does a turtle do for me, though? I'm like, all right, yeah, that's a really good question, because if we put things into perspective, that's kind of the large looming question that we're dealing with when we talk to industry and people who don't understand what we do. They don't live where we live, right? So they're like, turtles, meh, what do they do for us, right? They maintain the health of healthy wetland systems. They maintain the food webs within them. They propagate seeds and fungus across the land because they like to make large movements across the land. They're very culturally significant, especially for our First Nations in this area and everywhere. And also, they're generally awesome. But that's a given. We do live here on Turtle Island, so it's really important that we protect it. So, I'm gonna rip through this because I forgot it's just 15 minutes. Snakes are really important. They contribute to these ecosystems. The Anishinaabe community knows this, and they're recognized as medicines and protectors of the medicines. They overwinter in some wetlands. Snakes in culture, they're healers, helpers and clan animals, protectors of medicine, etc. I want you guys to take a good look at this picture. Okay, this is one of our wetlands, and we've had Blanding's turtles move through here, a lot of other species at-risk reptiles that move through here. It's completely dry, bone dry. And this is what we're seeing in our systems. And this is what's really troubling because we have animals that depend on these. So when they're either too dry or too wet, we're dealing with something that's kind of out of our control. But the more we can understand that, the better. So the purpose of this project is to foster these collaborations and relationships between our First Nations communities and the communities and organizations trying to make these adaptive management changes. So we're integrating Indigenous science, Western science, and citizen science. And the way that we're doing that is something I like to tell my westernized scientific friends is in the last few minutes of time, we've only learned to quantify and number and analyze things that our First Nations communities have known for thousands and thousands of years. So we're only learning the things that are already known. So we need to start looking through that lens as well and recognize that as an equally valuable method of science because there's a lot of perspective that can be gained from that. So when we talk about that, this project is going to be gathering centuries of land-based knowledge from our community members to understand what is climate change doing and what does that mean for your traditional ways of life and resources, and what have you seen change, and what is important strategies for us to develop in order to what to look for, what are we looking for beyond what we think is the solution of how to look. When it comes to TEK, traditional ecological knowledge is a very valuable and sacred kind of knowledge, so it's important that it's used and collected in a respectful way, but also used and applied in a respectful way. So we're having our first conference this week, actually, where we're inviting elders and youth together to discuss climate change, how it's affected traditional ways of life and resources, what that means for our wetland systems, our moose, our resources, and all the animals that live within them, and how to move forward in a way that we understand what we're dealing with and what the values from these communities can actually provide to this type of research. For citizen science, we have our youth always working in the community with our elders, and we have workshops to bring everyone together and share that knowledge, and also be collecting data with our teams. You don't have to be a scientist to be doing good science. We have presentations and workshops, BioBlitz surveys, deploying little types of data collection mechanisms, and working with our communities to educate them about sustainability and species at risk and why it's important to do what we do and bring back to what it is to be stewards of the land. For Western science, we're looking at the seasonal timing of plants and animals, precipitation, temperatures, CO2, wind speed, relative humidity, animal phenology, and habitat change. So for the Western scientific approach, I'm just going to kind of buzz through this because we only have a little bit of time. But we set up this big fancy weather station. It's called an eddy covariance weather station, and it takes in a whole large sum of continuous climate data. And what's important is it's in a habitat, in a wetland, that hosts the home for a lot of species at risk. So we can start looking at both what is actually happening climate-wise, but we can also be monitoring the species themselves and monitoring their habitats. But we can also be integrating what we're learning about the traditional significance and the historical knowledge of that area. to recognize what change we're actually observing. So in a partnership with McMaster, they're the eco-hydrology team, and they helped us build and set up this big fancy tower. And with that, things that we're monitoring, like I said, is water level, peat and soil temperature, the snow depth, and seasonal plant development, because things change as the water systems change. The ecosystem fluxes within that, and these are really important because wetlands are where our reptiles overwinter. So it has to be a relatively stable habitat, or that whole population is in serious, serious trouble. So we're trying to look at it from every approach possible. When you look at climate change and things even like road construction, anthropogenic influences on these systems can have drastic effect as to how they react to it. So they shift and they change. So it's also important that we realize what's going on there in order for us to functionally manage how to move forward. For the animals, we're looking at the seasonal timing of plants and animals. We have bioacoustic software, frog loggers, because what we've learned from the community is when the frogs start to call in the spring, that's when the fish start to run. So there's a lot of cues from the environment that our communities use in order to practice traditional ways of life that are very important to continue to manage those. And it all starts with how can we understand what's going on. So we're starting to deploy temp loggers in the water systems. We're starting to actually monitor the frog systems to see what's going on there and kind of look at things from a much bigger perspective. With turtles, we're looking at emergent times, habitat changes, behavioral changes. And when we're talking to the communities about it, we want to understand what do those mean to you? And what have you seen change? And what concerns do you have for these species based on how you have seen things change over time, and what does that mean for the future? For gestation surveys, we've actually partnered with GBVR a few years ago to look at Massasauga rattlesnakes and where they like to gestate their babies. They give live birth, so they really like somewhere to just sit and bake their young all summer, but it has to be perfect on the thermoregulatory scale for them in order to successfully do that, and everything is super vulnerable, I can't speak, that's fine. Vulnerable to these crazy changes in weather, so even these girls are at risk of having disrupted reproductive cycles. When it comes to moose, this is a very valuable traditional resource in this area, and we're starting to see moose changes and the habitat that moose depend on change. We need to understand from the community perspective what that means to them and what will happen if there's a complete shift away from moose, and how can we better manage this to bring these systems back to some sort of equilibrium for our communities who depend on them so greatly. And so basically the significance of this project is we want to take what we know now about doing research and climate research and ecological research, but also change it into more of a contemporary view of how we can look at things. We need to integrate all ways of knowing because they're all equally as valuable when we move into the future of trying to learn how we're going to manage all of this climate change conundrum. And I think once we can take a step back from what we think we know and really see value in the things that we can learn from our neighboring communities and the people that have preceded our existence here for a very long time, I think that will bring much value to how we can move forward into the future together in managing how to tackle this and also what we're looking for in general. So why do we do what we do? We do it for our future. We do it for the future generations. We do it for the next 7 generations. And because it's really important that we provide them the future that they deserve. And we also need to preserve traditional ways of life. We need to make sure that our communities can maintain these traditional ways of life so they can also be passing these things down with the resources available to those communities. We all live here on Turtle Island together. So as said once and said twice and said many times before, we have a responsibility to do the same thing that she's done for us, which is to give her life and to make sure that she can continue to do the same for us. She was not happy that I was there. See that side eye? But this is why we do it, so this can be continued for generations and generations into the future. Thank you. Be blessed.
We do have time for probably one question, and then it's break time. That's not to stop you from that.
Around all day.
I just had a question about the fish species that you're monitoring. I noticed it was
So walleye is a very, very important cultural, my mouth has stopped working, so that's cool. Walleye is a very important traditional species here. It's something that our communities have relied on and worked with for a very, very long time. And they've been a very active part of the ecosystems. And their presence and systems are starting to change substantially, especially in the Mag River. Our elders and our community members have noticed, have observed very noticeable change in those populations alongside sturgeon. We used to have many sturgeon in these rivers, and now we're seeing one of, so we want to know what's going on there, because that's a huge indicator for something's off, something's going on. So when we're looking to the communities and our elders of saying, this is what's changed, this can give us some actual insight as to what we need to start looking for and looking at, things that we've probably missed as Western scientists. So these are very important species that have been making a very noticeable shift on very many different levels. I hope that answered that. Cool. I'll be around all day. Cool.
That's great. Cory, as well as a number of other partners in the coast, are part of what is actually a community-nominated priority place, focusing on species at risk, but all of this work. And I suspect strongly by the end of the year that there will be a follow-up conference and presentation where we'll be able to sort of dive a little bit more deeply into some of the species at risk components, but not ignoring things like climate change as well. So you're now on our mailing list if you wish, and we'll send out invitations or notations on when those kind of presentations are happening, and we'll give Cory more time as well at those. So it is time for a 15-minute break. I would invite you, if you have questions that you don't feel, or that you didn't feel comfortable asking, or there wasn't time, there are 2 sheets up here, and I'll put some markers below them. Please feel free to come up and write your questions there. They may not get answered directly today, but we'll try our best with the time that we have. I'll remind you as well that there are some summaries on chemical contaminants and habitat in terms of what the priorities that are kind of boiling up from some of the research that has been going on and what we see as priorities moving forward. Please read those, and then beside those again are comment sheets that you could write with pen. Please don't write in big markers, because then you'll use up all the space really quickly. The other last one is that if I could ask Kyle and Dawson just to stand up for me really quickly. There is a program that has been created, or an organization or group that's been created, that they've created, called the Georgian Bay Anishinaabeg Youth. And they are the group that, through the Bias Reserve, created and built the Wasauksing, or orchestrated that. This is a bit of a sales pitch for them, which is that these t-shirts are available outside, and this is a fundraiser for that youth program to help them continue delivering youth engagement, land-based knowledge engagement programs in the biosphere region and beyond. So those are outside of the front desk. You can have a look there, and as well, Kyle and Dawson are around to answer questions about the Wasauksing. We have about 15 minutes for you to get snacks and coffee and stand up and walk around. And we will probably, I'm not sure whether David will run through the hall dancing a jig, or we'll find a way to get you gathered back in. So, see, he's already dancing. You can leave though. Thanks so much.